Welcome to Demonic Diaries, the YouTube channel where we explore the darkest corners of the human mind. Join me, your host, as I delve into the pages of terrifying tales and haunting stories. From the depths of hell to the darkest depths of the human psyche, we'll be your guide through the most bone-chilling and spine-tingling stories that will keep you up at night. So buckle up and prepare to be scared, because on Demonic Diaries, every story has a dark side. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified of new videos. Let's get started. Number 1. I wasn't afraid anymore. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was a message from my best friend Ethan. "Hey, dude, you coming to the party tonight? Everyone's gonna be there." I sighed and rubbed my eyes. I had a long day at work, and all I wanted to do was crawl into bed and sleep for a week. But I knew that if I didn't go, I would regret it. "Alright, I'm in. Where's the party?" Ethan sent me the address, and I got dressed and headed out. The party was in a sketchy part of town, but I wasn't too worried. I had lived in New York City my whole life, and I knew how to handle myself. When I arrived, the music was already blasting, and the smell of alcohol and weed filled the air. I spotted Ethan across the room, and I made my way over to him. "Hey, man, good to see you," he said, handing me a beer. We caught up for a bit, talking about work and our plans for the weekend. But then, something caught my eye. A man had entered the room, wearing a black hoodie and a mask that covered his face. He was just standing there, watching us. "Hey, who's that guy?" I asked Ethan, nodding in the man's direction. Ethan shrugged. "I don't know. Probably just some random dude." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the man. He was just too still, too quiet. As the night wore on, the man stayed in the same spot, never once moving or speaking. And then, suddenly, he was gone. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But then, over the next few days, people started disappearing. First, it was Ethan. He had gone out for a run and never came back. And then, it was my coworker Sarah. She had gone out to grab lunch and never returned. I started to panic. It was like the killer was picking us off one by one, and there was nothing we could do to stop him. And then, I received a message on my phone. "I'm watching you." I looked up, and there he was. The man in the black hoodie, standing across the street, watching me. I tried to run, but he was always one step ahead of me. Every time I turned a corner, he was there, waiting for me. And then, I found out who he was. He was a serial killer who had been terrorizing New York City for years. He had been caught and sentenced to life in prison, but somehow, he had escaped. I knew then that I had to stop him, before he could hurt anyone else. But I was afraid. I had never been in a situation like this before. But then, I remembered something my dad had told me when I was a kid. "You can't let fear control you," he had said. "You have to face it head on." And so, I did. I tracked the killer down to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. I could hear him moving around inside, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. And there he was, waiting for me. We fought for what felt like hours, the sound of our fists colliding echoing through the empty space. But in the end, I emerged victorious. The killer was lying on the ground, gasping for air. I knew that he would never hurt anyone again. As I walked out of the warehouse, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Number 2. My hearing aid picks up horrible sounds that nobody else can hear. "Ben." I bawled and blubbered. I could hear the doctor's voice. Following a motorcycle accident in early 2022, I lost my hearing and spent a tumultuous year in silence. I know many unfortunate people endure lifelong deafness, but my 18th year was the hardest of my life. For various reasons that aren't worth discussing, I had to wait a long time to receive a cochlear implant. The 2-week post-surgery wait for my device's activation was possibly the most arduous part of the entire ordeal. I just wanted the doctor to turn on the damn thing. Even as I sat in the hospital on the big day, I didn't believe it would actually work. I was ecstatic to be proven wrong. "Yes," I whispered to the doctor. "I can hear you." My parents embraced me, and we erupted into a chorus of contented sobbing. My older sister, Beth, looked up from her phone for a brief moment to acknowledge my existence. "Does this mean I can't insult the spotty shit to his face anymore?" she asked, grinning at me. "Beth," my mum huffed. "Sorry about that, Dr. Stewart." The old man chuckled. "No need to worry, Mrs. Hart. This is an exciting time for all of you, I'm sure. Now, Ben, it's important that we monitor your progress, okay? If you experience any issues with the implant, contact me. I nodded, smiling. I think I'd forgotten that I could actually speak again. Well, obviously, I never lost the ability to speak, but I had been self-conscious about the way my voice might sound. Thanks, Dr. Stewart, I croaked with tears in my eyes. I can't wait to listen to Radiohead again. Lord, give me strength, Beth muttered. As my family and I were gleefully gliding down the long corridors of the hospital, lost in conversation, I disregarded numerous red flags. Overwhelmed by the hospital's cacophony of sound, I didn't pay attention to the noises that only I could hear. It was in hindsight that I realized I had been overlooking unusual things from the second my implant had been activated. Where? I asked my sister. I didn't say anything, weirdo. Mum, Ben's ears are broken again, Beth said. I snorted at her sassy quip, though my mum didn't seem to find it quite as funny. Still, I frowned, as I was certain I heard a voice say, in the doorway. I shook it off, assuming that I just needed to accustom myself to the implant. I thought I'd simply mistaken a voice on the radio for my sister. When we arrived home, there was a welcome party of friends from my sixth form and relatives I hadn't seen in a long time. It was a jubilant occasion. My first ordinary evening in a year. The last ordinary evening of my life. It was on that first night, as I lay in bed, that some unholy breeze seeped beneath my duvet, biting my flesh with frozen fangs. Something was in the room with me. I could feel it. Or, rather, I could hear it. Everyday noises sounded, but they were entirely out of place. Fingernails tapping a wooden surface. Glass clinking glass. Rustling. One particular sound was quite unnerving. Squelching. Footsteps in the muck of our rain-soaked garden. I ran to my bedroom window, looked outside, and saw nothing. But the foreboding footsteps persisted. The doctor had warned that things would sound tinny, but that wasn't what I was experiencing. My family and friends had all sounded robotic as they spoke. The voice in the car and the footsteps in the mud, however, had a distinctness to them more intimate than any sound I'd ever heard, even before losing my hearing. It was at that moment I recalled my walk through the hospital. Every noise, whether it had been my mother's voice or clacking computer keys, sounded slightly muffled and distorted. And yet, a silky smooth voice had been buried somewhere in the mix. I just hadn't been able to distinguish the words over the racket. I sat upright in my bed and listened to the paced, purposeful footsteps. I did consider that a noisy neighbor might be strolling through their own squelching garden. I considered that I'd simply gained superhuman hearing. Eventually, the footsteps ceased, and I lay down, tucking myself beneath the duvet and closing my eyes. In the doorway. My toes curled until the nails had burrowed painfully into my flesh. It was the whispery voice that I had heard in the car. It sounded as if it had been whispered directly into my ear. My eyelids flew open. I sprang to a sitting position. There was nobody in the room. But I know what I heard. It wasn't an implant glitch. It wasn't the radio. It was a real voice. I started to hyperventilate, my skin itching under the weight of the invisible eyes that watched me. To an outside observer, all of this might be easily explainable, but I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. There was a real and present danger in that room. I didn't get any sleep. I sat in the dark for hours, eyeballing my bedroom wall. When I finally heard my sister stroll across the landing to get ready for work, I exhaled. I was still quivering, but at least I wasn't alone. She knocked on the door and entered without waiting for a reply. "How'd you sleep, dickhead?" she asked. "Any problems with the implant?" Heart still racing, I feigned a smile and shook my head. "I heard your deep masculine snores from the other end of the landing. It's working perfectly." Beth smiled and leaned calmly against the doorframe. "Jokes aside, I missed our dumb chats. God, it's good to be able to talk to you again, Ben." I smiled, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, and looked up to reply to my sister. To my horror, I found myself looking at a hand on Beth's shoulder, a decaying, near fleshless hand. Seemingly detached from any visible body, it tightly clenched my sister. "You all right, little man?" she asked, wincing and clutching her shoulder. "You look a bit pale. Maybe you..." Before my sister could say another word, the frightful fingers tightly clawed into her body and tugged. Beth was torn backwards, wrenched by a phantom force, and she tumbled over the banisters on the upstairs landing. I screamed and ran out of my room, only to find myself standing at the top of the stairs, faced with a sight I cannot scrub from my memory. My sister's body lay crumpled and disfigured at the foot of the staircase. My parents quickly emerged, screeching incoherently for help. As I stood there, transfixed by the horror of events unfolding around me, I felt something hunting a hand on my own shoulder. Words tentatively trickled into my ear. It's not polite to eavesdrop, Benjamin. Number 3. I'm a security guard who works the night shift at an art gallery, but I don't protect the paintings. I won the job, I said. It was 2 years ago, but I can vividly recall every aspect of that interview. The innocence of those 4 words. The stillness of the gallery. My befuddled reaction to Amy Andrews, the gallery owner. His questions unsettled me. Her composure never waned. Are you a spiritual man, Mr. Hull? Miss Andrews asked. Yes, I answered. Are we talking about the art? I can't say I'll be able to give philosophical or religious insights. Don't worry, Miss Andrews replied, smiling. I'm not trying to trip you up. In a way, my question does relate to the paintings, but perhaps not in the way you might expect. I just want you to know that I was a police officer for many years before working as a security guard at the embassy, I said. I have plenty of references. The gallery owner raised a hand, smiling politely. I've seen your CV. I promise that you don't have to fight your corner, Mr. Hull. I know you're physically capable, but this job takes a toll on a mental level. I nodded my head, ignorantly believing that I understood her. I know. I work many solo night shifts at the embassy, but I can handle it. That's not what I mean, she replied. Do you know why my gallery exhibits a permanent display of my sister's artwork? To honor her memory, I said. I saw that news clip a couple of years ago about her admittance to the local psychiatric ward. Harper Andrews, right? I'm sorry. That must have been tough on your family. Not as tough as Harper found it, Miss Andrews replied. Her artwork tells the story of her decline into sickness, not sickness of the mind, but sickness of the soul. She faced something and captured it in these paintings to protect humanity. Hearing her speak, I thought Amy seemed just as unwell as her sister, but I would soon learn that it was no delusion. Every night on the job is terrifying, but none so much as the first. And I'll never forget Miss Andrews' parting words as she walked out of the door. At night, the paintings must be closely guarded. Left unobserved for too long, they can well just make sure you keep watch. What is this? Night at the museum? I muse. No, far worse than fiction. The first hour of my shift was blissfully mundane. Basking in the blue glow of the gallery's security lighting, a perturbing painting eyeballed me from the far wall. It depicted a lanky, pencil-thin man with frightfully long legs and a pair of white eyes, which seemed to follow me around the room, as all freakish eyes in paintings do. As I strolled around the gallery, following Miss Andrews' strict rule of regularly observing the paintings, I took a closer look at the white-eyed man. I shivered at his janky jaw, which hung abnormally loosely. He wore jet black trousers, but his monstrous bony torso was shirtless, and he was the farthest a man could be from looking human. I stopped to read the plaque beneath the painting of the hunting figure. The exactor, the one who exacts torture. He longs to break free. He will devour mankind. I hurried past the painting, reasonably certain that nobody would ever dream of stealing artwork so horrifying, no need to guard it too closely. But the gallery didn't exactly become more joyous as I continued my round. They were petrifying. I should have given the paintings more than a cursory glance before applying for the job position. Another painting portrayed a young girl, no more than 10 years of age, who wore a bright red pinafore, plaited brunette hair, and a blank face. Not figuratively. Blank. In place of eyes, a nose, and a mouth, there was only skin. Taut flesh, painted with smooth brushstrokes that made Harper's intentions abundantly clear. The artist had not accidentally smudged the face. She had purposefully neglected to give the little girl any features. Harper's youth dies. As we age, we slowly come to life. We sin. They know that. They know everything. There were countless paintings of dreadful scenes too. Cities in ruin. The end of the world. Endless infernos of melting flesh, and they were the lucky ones who were offered a swift mercy. The survivors in the apocalyptic paintings were tortured in gory, gruesome ways by dreadful, inhuman men like the one in the first painting. I usually have a strong stomach, but something about those paintings filled me with unbearable dread. The apocalyptic art seemed so visceral. As I viewed it, I was certain I heard the screams of the last humans on Earth, felt the heat of the flames on my skin, saw the exactors move. And then there was a painting of the art gallery. The plaque read, "Prison. They entered our world, so I locked them here." Feeling suitably terrified, I scurried to the sofa by the gallery's entrance and plopped myself down. I work a day job, and the night shift is just my way of making ends meet. The exhaustion of that jam-packed day finally hit me. It was only when I sat down on the sofa that fatigue walloped me like a wool. My eyelids closed. An hour later, a thrumming sound startled me awake. I twisted my head to see a notification on my phone, chuckling in relief. I opened the message from Care, my wife, welcoming the distraction from my isolated, soundless night shift. But it was an odd message. I was telling my mum about your new job, and she said you should look for another one. Apparently, there are always adverts for the night shift on Facebook, and her friend's husband had a mental breakdown after one shift. He won't talk to anyone about what happened. There was another thrumming sound, but it wasn't a vibration from my phone. It was a muffled voice. My head snapped up in time to catch a silhouette vanishing behind one of the gallery walls. I managed to stifle a scream, but I lost my composure and climbed up. I contemplated running out of the gallery, but something stopped me, and it wasn't the prospect of being fired. It was those paintings of Armageddon. I rose to my feet, using the flashlight on my phone to illuminate the dimly lit gallery floor. That muffled sound repeated again, haunting me, a ghostly groan of some emotion I couldn't quite place, but I knew it terrified me. And when I rounded the corner, I found myself facing something utterly inexplicable. The girl from Harper's Youth dies. A young version of Harper, I could only assume. I trembled on the spot as she took clunky steps towards me with frail, near-skeletal legs. She continued to groan, seemingly speaking beneath the flesh that covered her entire face. "I can't understand you," I whispered in horror as the ghastly girl stopped a foot in front of me. I found myself leaning forwards, driven by a force beyond my control, and then the most horrifying thing happened. My cheek twisted to the side, allowing my ear to melt through the phantom pull of the girl's face. I screamed silently, terrified to find that I was unable to move my body or utter a sound. Then, with my ear beneath the flesh on Harper's horrendous, featureless face, I could finally hear the words she had been repeating in a muffled, ghoulish voice. "Why did you close your eyes?" the malformed ghost asked in a distorted cry. My body was suddenly hurled to the floor, and the little girl fled into the shadows. My eyes shot to the far wall, and I found that my god achieved the impossible. It sank to a deeper realm of fear. He was gone. The exactor was a blank canvas. The horrible entity had escaped his painting. Harper's disembodied voice whispered beside my ear, scaring the life out of me. "Find him. He's hiding." I looked up at the ghostly girl's painting. Harper had returned to the canvas, but she was adopting a different pose. Her index finger was pointing at the painting of the art gallery. I yelped in fright, seeing what she had noticed. Behind one of the painted windows on the empty top floor of the building, that inhuman man stood and watched me. Legs shaking, I walked across the gallery to the set of stairs in the back corner. They led to an out-of-bounds floor. Miss Andrews made that abundantly clear. But she also made it clear that I had to keep my eyes on the artwork, and I failed at that. I didn't really have any options. Quivering, I crept up the creaky wooden stairs to a floor that was littered with unhung paintings. The frames were shrouded in white sheets. And at the far end of the room, illuminated only by the moonlight which poured through the murky glass panes, I saw something truly terrifying. The exactor. He stood as tall as the ceiling, and his large form was crouching over an uncovered painting. As I crept closer, I saw what had captivated the terrible creature. It was one of Harper's apocalyptic paintings, depicting a world in flames, and the exactor was melding its shriveled, unclothed arm with the canvas, much as young Harper sank my ear through her flesh. However, as I approached the abomination, casting my flashlight upon him, its flesh started to sizzle, and it unleashed a hideous hissing sound. At first I thought the light hurt it, but then I realized it had become aware of the guard's watchful eyes upon it. I finally realized the power of keeping watch. I knew why I was there. "Cast it away," Harper's voice whispered. "How?" I cried. The man spun around, and I screamed at the sight of his wretched white eyes. They were worse in the flesh, and he was far larger than he had appeared in the painting. The entity lunged at me, curling its bony hands around my neck, squeezing the light out of my soul. I slipped into the darkness, and the exactor howled at me, a howl that sounded like a boat's horn. "Tell it to return to his cell," Harper croaked. "Tell it that you won't stop looking at it until it does what you say." I wheezed, watching flickering images in the exactor's blank eyes. Prophecies of a direful destruction, a fiery vision of mankind's end at the hands of this terrifying apparition and its demonic army. He intended to scare me, but the thought of such a horrific future only motivated me to keep my eyes open. I won't stop, I said, slowly choking. Until you stop. Inhuman flesh burning beneath the weight of my vision, the exactor screeched in fury, but I thought the world might already be doomed. If I'd passed out, I would have left the demon unguarded and free to wreak havoc upon mankind. But in some favorable twist of fate, it released my neck, and I fell to the ground. It, too, must have been close to death. I crawled downstairs, and the canvases were filled with paint once more. Everything was back in its place. And the strangest thing is that I didn't hang up my hat. I didn't call it a day. When Miss Andrews came to the gallery at 6 in the morning, she seemed fully prepared to watch another traumatized guard quit the job. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not after seeing the exactor's apocalyptic desire. Too much is at stake. We hope you found these stories both thrilling and thought-provoking. Delving into the darkest parts of the human psyche can be a scary and unsettling experience, but it's also an important one. By exploring our deepest fears and desires, we can gain a better understanding of ourselves and the world around us. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel for more spine-tingling content. And always remember to keep the lights on.